king of German mercenaries.
Chapter 55, Being set as an example. Considering that many princes might not take the emperor seriously and would not execute the emperor's orders, Maximilian I, at the suggestion of Marin, also wrote a letter to the Pope in Rome, asking the Pope to advocate abstinence for a period of time throughout Europe. Because syphilis is spread by promiscuity. If everyone abstains from sex, syphilis will have no channel for transmission. After resolving this matter, Maximilian I was very impressed with Marin. This little guy, who was about the same age as Prince Philip, not only helped him defeat the arrogant French in Italy and brought him spoils worth more than 1 million gold coins, but also helped him suppress the outbreak of a plague, syphilis. After thinking about it, Maximilian I decided to carry out a wide-ranging publicity campaign throughout the empire, and to publicize Marin's advanced deeds, along with the ban on syphilis. Marin was originally just a young man who was not even a knight, but after helping his emperor fight, he was made a baron with an independent territory in just a few months because of his military exploits. Such a story is definitely very inspiring in this era. This incident is also equivalent to telling everyone in disguise, "Come on, serve me, the emperor, there are great benefits," except for those from the Swabian Union and Duke Albrecht of Saxony, not the Elector of Saxony, but the Elector of Saxony's younger brother. All the great nobles who had divided the territory within the Holy Roman Empire basically stood on the opposite side of the emperor. Therefore, the emperor needed a new force to break this situation. And the emergence of Marin gave the emperor a propaganda point. Maximilian I was considered to be a relatively wise and capable monarch in the Habsburg family. Many people believe that Charles V was the most capable monarch of the Habsburg family, but in fact, when Charles V ascended the throne, he controlled Spain, a big money bag with a huge amount of gold and silver from the Americas, so he was certainly confident. You have to know that at that time in Europe, mercenaries were the mainstream, and whoever had money could get things done. Charles V had enough money to hire enough troops to defeat all of Europe, as he owned the Spanish colonial empire. Moreover, the Spanish phalanx was very popular at that time. The gold and silver of Spain, as well as the Spanish phalanx, were not created by Charles V, but existed by themselves. Even Charles V was able to inherit the Spanish throne because Maximilian I let his son Philip marry the crazy woman, Juana. Therefore, it is not easy to comment on the ability of Charles V. But Maximilian I was different. When he ascended the throne, the Habsburg family was in a precarious situation. His father, Frederick III, fought for hegemony with Hungary and ended up losing more than half of Austria. And his father-in-law, Charles the Bold, fought for hegemony with France and lost his life. Therefore, he took over two messes, Austria and Burgundy. Under such circumstances, Maximilian I decisively abandoned the old military system of fiefdom mobilization and adopted the emerging mercenary system, which enabled the Habsburg family to have a powerful force of 15,000 infantry and 1,500 knights at a low cost, and also consolidated the imperial power of the Habsburg family. Therefore, Maximilian I was the most important founder of the Habsburg family's monopoly of the Holy Roman Empire for 300 years. Charles V could only be considered a decent third-generation emperor at best. As a relatively capable monarch, Maximilian I had a good eye. He could see Marin's outstanding ability, so he was relatively polite to Marin. Before, Marin bargained with him, but he didn't take it as an offense and was happy to talk to him. If another little knight dared to be so arrogant with Maximilian I, he would have been beaten out by the Austrian royal knights. Of course, the emperor felt that Marin's inspirational story of success under his command would surely inspire those young and promising young people to come and serve the emperor. Therefore, Maximilian I decisively established Marin as a positive role model and publicized it. Facts have proved that the emperor's vision was very good. What the common people love to hear most is the inspirational stories of these young heroes. The story of how Marin defeated 8,000 well-equipped French knights with 4,000 men and horses soon became a household name in the Austrian Principality, and began to spread in Burgundy, and then spread to the entire Holy Roman Empire. Those nobles who were against the emperor were unable to stop the spread of Marin's legendary story in the empire. Because they had no reason to stop the spread and diffusion of the deeds of a young hero like Marin. But they knew that this matter was beneficial to the emperor. Sure enough, after the propaganda, many young people in Austria and Swabia regarded Marin as their idol. In this era, there were no singers or stars, and young people didn't know who to admire. As for the emperors and dukes, they were too high and too far away from the young people. Marin is different. He is also a young man, even just a 17-year-old boy, and a boy from a low-level knight family. He is very down to earth. In Marin's success, they seem to see their own future. After hearing Marin's inspirational story, many young wandering knights in Austria gave up the idea of serving those nobles and went directly to Vienna to find Maximilian I. In their opinion, if Marin, a 17-year-old boy, could succeed as a wandering knight, why couldn't I? Even if I wasn't as good as Marin, I could still get the title of an official imperial knight. Because most wandering knights were trainee knights, not real knights at all. And real knights needed to be canonized by great nobles. Only knights who were canonized could be considered real nobles. And trainee knights could only be considered elite warriors, not nobles. In a short period of time, the emperor recruited 500 wandering knights from all over Austria to come to Vienna to serve, which made the emperor very happy. You have to know that before the Spanish phalanx appeared, muskets were not the standard weapon of the army. And the knight class had not yet been suppressed by muskets and gradually withdrew from the stage of history. Therefore, knights were still a popular, technical profession, in this era. Maximilian I was able to recruit 500 more knights, which was considered a good harvest. Because, although there were many knights in the Holy Roman Empire, there were also many nobles. Not to mention the emperor and the duke, there were also many knights who served the earls, viscounts, and barons. The emperor himself was in poor financial condition, which resulted in many knights being unwilling to serve him, a poor emperor, which made him very depressed. Now, inspired by Marin's inspirational story, many young knights were eager to serve the emperor. Not only those wandering knights, but also many strong young men with difficult livelihoods have also thought about joining the army to eat food. Especially, the young men under Marin who returned home with hundreds of gold coins. They went to Italy, built houses and bought land after returning home, married beautiful wives, and reached the peak of their lives. This is a living advertisement. As a result, many poor young people were eager to go to Vienna to seek refuge with the emperor, hoping to make a lot of money and reach the pinnacle of life like their predecessors. Chapter 56 Returning Home in Glory. Marin originally wanted to leave Vienna early and go home, but the emperor kept Marin for publicity purposes, and asked him to organize activities and serve as a model. Whenever foreign envoys and representatives of various principalities and counties came to Vienna, the emperor would bring Marin to meet them. Then, the emperor would kindly introduce the young hero of the empire, Marin, to the guests. At this time, Marin had to stand up and bow, with a fake smile on his face, and by the way, make a few cool poses for the guests to watch. Then, everyone would watch Marin like a monkey, and make comments from time to time. Many people also questioned Marin's military exploits, because Marin looked too thin. In the eyes of some nobles who advocated the power of force, Marin, who defeated 8,000 French knights, must be at least a muscular man with a height of 2 meters. Who knew that when they met Marin in person, they found out that he was just a 1.75 meter tall, he had grown taller, and a slightly thin boy. Then, the emperor would tell his guests how Marin had fooled him. Marin would stand aside and pose, cooperating with the emperor's speech. After being an unpaid model for the emperor for a month, Marin was allowed to leave Vienna with his men. With a look of grief and indignation on his face, Marin came to the station of his men in the west of the city and ordered everyone to leave. "Boss, what's up?" Schwartz ran over and asked curiously. The name boss was given because Marin had watched too many Hong Kong movies in his previous life and felt that being a boss was very impressive. Moreover, he did not like the name served very much, so he simply asked Schwartz and others to call him boss in private. As for Kahn, Kohler and other servants, they continued to call him young master. "It's nothing. I'm your boss and I'm exhausted these days. I have to pose with the emperor every day like a puppet." Marin said angrily. "Boss, don't be ungrateful. You can stay with the emperor. I don't know how many people in the whole empire envy you." Schwartz rolled his eyes. If the emperor was willing to take him out to show off, he would be happy. It's really annoying to compare yourself with others. But who can blame Marin for being so powerful? As for why they were able to ambush the French, he still couldn't figure it out. Of course, if he figured it out, it would be weird. Who the hell knew that Marin was a time traveler? Kohler, the top lackey of Marin, came to report the situation quickly. All the extra horses in his hands were sold in Austria. Austria is the richest region in Germany. Although there are far fewer rich people than Venice, it is definitely better than those noble territories in the north. Because Austria is also a rich region with developed agriculture. And in regions with developed agriculture, there is also a great demand for draft horses. Therefore, Kohler lowered the price in Austria and easily sold all the extra 1,000 draft horses. Then, Kohler still had 200 stallions, 800 mares, and the 30 war horses that Marin had retrieved from the emperor, a total of 1,030 horses. While Marin was accompanying the emperor on a show, Schwartz and others also taught the 400 men under his command how to ride horses. When they were rushing back to Austria from Italy, they had to walk with the main force because they had to move with the main force. Now that Marin has separated from the main force, they can naturally ride horses. Moreover, 400 people have 1,030 horses, so everyone can ride 2 horses in turn, which can also speed up the journey. Brothers, let's set off. When we get to my territory, I will give everyone some land and let your family become self-employed farmers. Moreover, for those of you who don't have wives, I will find a way for you. Thank you, boss. Thank you, boss. Everyone cheered. The family conditions of those who came out to be mercenaries were not very good. Many of them were simply driven out by the serf owners of some manors because the population was too large. Many people were born in serf families and did not have their own land. If they go back, they will have no one to rely on, so they might as well follow Marin. At least, Marin is a baron now and can support them. Most of those who left the team before were from self-cultivating farmers and had a relatively free status. Unlike many of those who stayed behind, many of them were still serfs. If they go back, the serf owners will continue to enslave them if they are happy. Maybe the 100 gold coins will also be robbed. And if they followed Marin, it was obvious that Marin wanted to promote them and make them free citizens. How could they not be happy? Free citizens in Europe were very cool. Didn't you see that many revolutions in France were initiated by the free citizens of Paris? Who has ever heard of the serf revolution? Although they were not a big deal at all. Because serfs were used to being slaves and lacked the desire and self-confidence to fight. Free citizens were very confident. As long as there were many people, they dared to confront the monarch. Then, Marin asked someone to write for them. This group of people were basically illiterate, to help them write letters home, telling their families to prepare for immigration. If there were no problems, Marin would send someone to pick them up after they settled down on Texel Island. If there were problems, such as the original serf owners not releasing them, Marin would use official channels, and even pay a little compensation, to get the soldiers' families over. The reason why Marin did not let these soldiers go home to pick up the people was, on the one hand, he was afraid that they would never come back, on the other hand, Kohler still had more than 300,000 gold coins to escort. If all the people ran away and the army came to rob the money, he would not be able to resist. Besides, Marin didn't know what was happening on Texel Island yet. If he rashly took the people over but had no place to stay, that would be bad. Of course, when Marin was promoting it, he naturally used the last reason. Moreover, this reason was also very reasonable. After unifying everyone's thoughts, Marin led everyone, one person riding 2 or 3 horses, and headed towards Hoffman Manor on the Ruhr River. On the way, Marin met with a man from an Italian chamber of commerce that he had previously commissioned in Venice outside the city of Cologne. During this trip to Italy, Marin seized a total of 7,000 sets of plate armor. Charles VIII finally asked the last 2,000 knights to take off their plate armor in order to escape, and 5,000 sets of horse armor, not counting the ones on the 2,000 war horses that were captured. In the end, he only handed over 6,000 sets of plate armor, including those for the Venetians, and 4,000 sets of horse armor. He commissioned a reputable Italian chamber of commerce to send the remaining 1,000 sets of plate armor and 1,000 sets of horse armor to Cologne. As for why this was the case, it was because the plate armor and horse armor were huge in size, and these were all embezzled by Marin, and could not be seen by the emperor. As for the gold coins, because they were small in size, they could be carried in a bullock cart, so they were not so conspicuous and could be carried with him. Besides, he would not trust others to escort the armor, but he would not trust others to escort hundreds of thousands of gold coins. What if the escort was evil and embezzled the gold coins? After paying the considerable balance, Marin led the group, escorting several carts of plate armor and horse armor, and headed for Bochum. The transmission of news in the Middle Ages was relatively slow, and Marin's heroic deeds were only widely circulated in Austria, Swabia and Burgundy. In other regions, the nobles did not help to spread the news, so the news was slower than in the above 3 regions. When Marin was in Austria, he would encounter some fans watching him during the march. But outside Austria, except for the soldiers guarding the city who came over to question him nervously, no one else paid any attention to Marin and his group. When they arrived at the Rhine and Ruhr rivers, most people didn't know about Marin's deeds at all, and just regarded him as a passerby. This made Marin, who had received a lot of attention in Austria, feel a little disappointed. Of course, this was not without its benefits. At least, he no longer had to worry about people watching him while he was marching. When in Austria, many people knew that they were the Black Cross Legion that defeated the King of France when they saw the black cross and white vests worn by their team, and then there would be onlookers, affecting everyone's journey. So much so that Marin later asked everyone to take off their black cross vests to avoid being surrounded and watched by others. But when they arrived in northern Germany, his fame had not yet spread. So, they put on the white vests with black crosses again. When they arrived in Bochum, old Hoffmann and Adler, who had received letters from home in advance, were already waiting at the main road with 10 attendants. Marin's return home this time was completely different from the last time he returned home. Last time, Marin returned home because he failed in his application, and old Hoffmann could still control him. However, when he came back this time, Marin had become an imperial baron, and a baron with an autonomous territory. His status was completely different from that of the trainee knight. Even old Hoffmann had to treat Marin with caution. Europe is not like the East of the same period, which emphasizes filial piety. In medieval Europe, the title determines everything. Even as Marin's father, old Hoffmann must respect Marin, who has been promoted to baron. Because Marin's title is higher than his. Of course, as a father, old Hoffmann does not need to salute Marin, but he can no longer beat and scold Marin, the baron. When Marin appeared near the intersection with 400 people and thousands of horses, Marin's brother Adler showed a strong envy in his eyes. Chapter 57, At Home. Father, brother. Marin was a little surprised to see old Hoffmann and Adler coming to greet him when he arrived at the intersection. But he quickly reacted, dismounted and greeted old Hoffmann and Adler. Old Hoffmann said, in a reserved manner, but he was actually very happy. He was a knight who was not favored in the territory of Mark, but he had a son who became an imperial baron personally appointed by the emperor. How could he not be proud? However, he had to be reserved in front of his son's subordinates. Adler, who was standing next to him, breathed a sigh of relief. In the past, he was the eldest son who could inherit the family business. Moreover, because of his excellent martial arts, he would definitely pass Earl Mark's assessment in a few years and become a knight of the earldom. Therefore, his status was naturally superior to Marin, who had no inheritance rights. Although he had been nice to Marin before, Marin had become a baron of the empire, ruling a region, and a well-known figure in the empire, while he had not yet made a name for himself, not even a knight. Therefore, he could not help but think too much. For example, how to get along with Marin in the future. Should he salute Marin? Old Hoffmann and Mrs. Mary certainly didn't need to salute Marin. Although Europe didn't advocate filial piety, there were still basic moral principles. But Adler and Marin were of the same generation, and Adler didn't raise Marin. If Marin cared, it wouldn't be impossible for Adler to salute him. You know, there is no saying in Europe that eldest brother is like father. Brothers are completely independent individuals, and at most they are close. Seeing that Marin still treated him the same, Adler breathed a sigh of relief. Being surpassed by his underage brother, Adler must have felt uncomfortable. But he was not stupid. Marin had become successful, so how could he not help him in the future? After the two groups reunited, the father and his two sons happily headed back. On the way, Adler asked Marin, "What's in your carts? They look so heavy." Adler pointed to the carts loaded with plate armor and horse armor. "Well, they are all the plate armor and horse armor used by French knights that I seized." Marin answered indifferently. "So, it's true that you defeated the King of France?" Adler had read the letter sent by Marin before, otherwise he wouldn't have known that Marin was going home. However, he was still skeptical about whether Marin had defeated the King of France. After all, he was the King of France, the first knight power in Europe, and he brought 8,000 knights with him. But Marin told him that the carts were loaded with captured armor, which made him believe it. Because there were only 3 knights in Hoffmann Manor, old Hoffmann, Adler and Marin didn't need to buy several carts of armor, and Marin couldn't afford it under normal circumstances. Why ask? How can my blood be bad? Old Hoffmann glared at Adler fiercely. Adler's doubt about Marin's military exploits was the same as doubting his bloodline was not awesome. Adler suddenly felt a little embarrassed, but he was not convinced and thought to himself, "Am I not your descendant? Why haven't I even been knighted?" Of course, he didn't dare to say it out loud. If he did, he would definitely be beaten up by old Hoffmann. Old Hoffmann might not beat up Marin, who was crowned a baron, but he would still have no pressure to beat him up. When the 400 men of the huge, Black Cross mercenary group and a large number of draft horses entered Hoffmann Manor, the entire manor was in an uproar. Lady Mary personally stood outside the gate of the manor with her 3 young children and a group of farm women, welcoming the return of her son and husband. Seeing the loving Lady Mary, out of instinct, Marin jumped off the horse again and rushed towards Lady Mary. "Mom, I'm so glad to see you again." Marin couldn't help but say this sentence as if he had rehearsed it thousands of times. It seems that the original owner of this body is very attached to his mother. No wonder, the original owner of this body was only a 17-year-old boy. And old Hoffman was a tyrant who often beat him, so the original owner naturally got close to Mrs. Mary. You're already so grown up, and you've been conferred the title of Baron, but you still love to act like a spoiled child. Lady Mary hugged her son and scolded him. But her tone did not contain any blame, but rather a sense of pride. Especially when she mentioned the word Baron, Lady Mary raised her head high. Okay, stop being sentimental and go in first. The banquet has been set up in the manor, take everyone in to eat. Old Hoffman said in a rare friendly tone. In the past, he might have kicked Marin directly, complaining that he was nagging. By the way, Dad, is there enough food at home? I brought 400 brothers back this time. There are also 1,030 horses that need to be fed. There is definitely enough food. But, Marin, why are there so many horses? I don't have enough horse feed. Old Hoffman was frightened by the number of horses Marin brought back. Yes, Marin, why did you bring back so many horses? Don't we have to hand over the captured war horses to the Emperor? Adler was also very curious. Although he was simple and honest, he was not stupid. He knew that war horses were precious strategic materials in Europe, more important than armor. Because not all horses can be used as war horses. War horses must be the pride of horses. Adler, don't you see that these horses are basically not wearing armor? Only 30 of them are war horses. The other thousands are draft horses. Of course, that's the pack horse used by the French heavy cavalry. Although its quality is not as good as a war horse, it is much better than an ordinary draft horse. The Emperor asked you to bring back so many draft horses. And he confiscated most of them. Old Hoffman was also surprised. Don't mention it, father. The Emperor is so stingy. I sent him 2,000 French prisoners, each of whom was worth at least 500 gold coins in ransom. In addition, I paid him 970 French war horses, 3,000 sets of plate armor, 2,000 sets of horse armor, and 3,000 two-handed swords. In the end, His Majesty only gave me a baron title and a small island as a barony. How stingy. Just be content. Baron is still young. Your father is just a knight. You know, it is not too much for you to become a baron from a commoner. Although the price is high, it is worth it. Because your descendants will also be barons. Moreover, the army under your command is paid by the Emperor, and the bulk of the spoils belongs to him. Isn't it normal? Although old Hoffman is not very smart, he has rich life experience. He knows that Marin's future will never be the same as before. As a hereditary baron, his descendants will not have to wait for the great lord to confer the title again. Just like, he must go to Markburg at the age of 24 or 25 to accept the assessment and selection of the court of Mark. Only after passing the assessment can he be granted the title of knight. What island? The one off the Italian coast or the North Sea, interrupted Lady Mary. She knew that among the territories controlled by Emperor Maximilian I, Austria and the Netherlands were both near the sea. However, Austria's seaport was very small, and there were no large islands at the seaport. Texel Island, on the North Sea coast, at the northern end of the province of Holland in the Netherlands. Texel Island seems to be the westernmost island of the Frisian Islands. It seems to be quite big. Mrs. Mary was born in East Frisia and is familiar with the Frisian Islands. Yes, it should be the largest island in the Frisian Islands. The land on it is about 162 square kilometers. You don't know what square kilometers are, right? Converted, it's about 20,000 ugrams, 40,000 acres. What? 20,000 uglams. Isn't that 40 times bigger than Hoffman Estate? Adler's eyes widened in surprise. Nonsense, otherwise how could he be a baron? Old Hoffman glared at Adler who was shouting. That's not true. I know the situation on the island. It's 20,000 ugrams. But the coastal beaches have a high salt content due to tidal issues and are not worth reclaiming. Plus, there are probably some hills on the island. I estimate that out of the 20,000 ugrams, there are several thousand ugrams that cannot be developed. Lady Mary grew up by the sea and is relatively familiar with those islands. However, her family is in East Frisia, so she is not very familiar with Texel Island, which is near West Frisia. In addition, I can actually recruit some fishermen. You know, that's an island, and the North Sea is a famous fishing ground. I can recruit fishermen to fish, and then collect most of their catch as taxes. Marin added. That's great. How about you take charge of all the fish in our house from now on? Adler said happily. Bao Mao, it's a 2-day journey, on horseback, from Texel Island to Bochum. If you send the fish back, it will have gone bad. The only thing we can send back is dried salted fish. But, my young master, do you like stinky salted fish? Marin looked at Adler with contempt. That's right. Adler was a little distressed. In fact, inherited from Mrs. Mary, Adler also likes to eat fish. Although he was stuck by a fish bone last time, it did not prevent him from liking to eat fish. Brother Adler is so stupid. Can't we run to Brother Marin's castle to eat fresh food? Little lowly Annie at the side couldn't help but worry about the eldest brother's IQ. Yes, Annie is smart. Let's go to Marin's new home to eat fish. Adler also reacted. Brother Marin, do you really have a castle? Simon, the third brother, asked Marin with his eyes wide open. Here, there seems to be a castle. However, it was built by a Dutch count more than 100 years ago as a holiday castle, so it shouldn't be very big. Moreover, it is said to have been abandoned for decades. This news was told to him by Maximilian I. The Netherlands was annexed by Charles the Bold, Duke of Burgundy, and now fell into the hands of the Habsburg family. That's also a castle. Unlike our home, which only has a few tiled houses. Simon said enviously. In the minds of medieval people, nobility was always associated with castles. Without a castle, one would be embarrassed to tell others that he was a noble. Ordinary knight families could not afford to build a castle. Even many poorer barons could not afford to build a castle. Marin was able to obtain a castle, even though it was an ancient castle, which was good enough. After all, the castle was made of stone and would not break for hundreds of years. What's the matter? Simon, if you and Albert are happy, you can live in my castle. But you have to wait until I have renovated the castle and make sure it is habitable. Really? Brother Marin, you are so nice. Simon and Albert both jumped up happily. Brother Marin is bad. He didn't even invite me to live in your castle. Little lowly Annie was unhappy. Okay, I formally invite the beautiful and lovely Miss Anne to come to my castle. Marin bowed gracefully, making Little Anne giggle. Okay, stop talking nonsense and let's go to the yard to eat. In order to entertain your men, I killed several pigs and made braised pork. Old Hoffman was also a little greedy. Last time Marin was at home, he taught Mrs. Mary how to cook Chinese food. This time, Mrs. Mary personally prepared a big pot of braised pork to entertain Marin's men. This dish was a favorite of carnivores Old Hoffman and Adler. In fact, due to the lack of spices, the braised pork made by Lady Mary was basically a castrated version. But even so, it was much better than the food eaten by medieval Europeans. Just looking at the greedy faces of the two rich nobles, Old Hoffman and Adler, you can see the lethality of this dish. The mercenaries seated in the courtyard cheered when they saw the pots of braised pork being served. You know, in Marin's army, this delicious dish is only served on festivals or when Marin is happy. So, when the pots of braised pork were served, these guys knew that they were in for a treat.